Hey everyone, quick lecture on states of consciousness, which is one of the shorter units in AP psychology. As always, this is not to replace any lectures in class, but rather to just be a kind of review and brief overview over some of the big topics from this unit. So, when we're talking about consciousness, it's not always the same as you might think when you think of someone like getting knocked unconscious, for example. When we talk about consciousness in psychology, we're talking essentially about our awareness of ourselves and our surroundings. And you can see I have listed there are several different states of consciousness. When you are in class and you're bored and you kind of have that 1,000-yard stare going and you're daydreaming about other things, that would be one state of consciousness. We're in a different state of consciousness when we dream, when we're asleep. If you get your wisdom teeth taken out and you're under some heavy medication, that's a different state of consciousness. When we look at consciousness, think our awareness of ourselves, the environment that surrounds us. When we are thinking about something, our current thought process, whatever that may be. Right now, it's probably the sound of my voice, the image on the screen, you perhaps taking some notes down. That is all conscious processing. It's what we are currently in the process of thinking about right now. Whereas unconscious processing, those are all the things that our mind's doing without us having to think about it. So, if you're writing notes, for example, you are consciously thinking about the content of what to write in your notes, but you are not consciously thinking about how to hold a pen. You're not consciously thinking about how to form different letters on the page. Those things happen unconsciously at the same time. And as a general rule of thumb, we can do a lot of different unconscious processing all at the same time. We can walk around a room, hold a conversation, and all of that. But it's very difficult for us to do two things simultaneously that both require conscious processing. So that type of multitasking is incredibly difficult. It's why having a conversation with someone while also texting at the same time is difficult. You have to bounce back and forth between those two things that both require your conscious attention. Um, Not uncommon for a college board to make sure that you have an understanding of what we mean by that idea of conscious processing and unconscious processing. Most questions in regard to consciousness with AP deal with sleep and sleep cycle. And we had a whole 90-minute lecture on just this one image, as you may recall. And so we'll go pretty quick. But the idea behind our sleep cycle is simply this, that throughout the night in a healthy sleep cycle, we go through these kind of ups and downs of what are called ultradian cycles. And we start with NREM1, and that stands for non rapid eye movement stage one. And the general trend as we go down this kind of scale here, as you go from NREM1, 2, and into 3, everything's slowing down. Your heart rate's slowing down, your breathing is deepening, your brain waves are slowing. When you are in REM1, you produce these alpha waves, which are slower than the beta waves you're likely producing right now as you are awake and consciously thinking about things. And when you get all the way down to NREM3, your brain produces these really long, slow waves called delta waves. And you can remember that, think deep sleep equals delta waves. And it's in that deep sleep that your body recovers from the day. And so we do see an increase in things like cell reproduction. We see an increase in the secretion of growth hormones. That all happens in our deep sleep. It takes about 45 minutes or so to get down into NREM3, and then you have to work your way back up. You go from NREM3 to NREM2, then NREM1, and then you hit this fourth stage, which is a really unique stage that we call REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep. And lots of really interesting things happen during REM sleep. Your breathing becomes kind of erratic and short. Your heart rate is accelerated. Your brain waves produce beta waves just like they are right now as you're awake. And physiologically speaking, it is as if your body is awake. Your body isn't awake. In fact, your body is completely paralyzed as far as the somatic nervous system is concerned. And what's happening during REM sleep is you have these really vivid dreams. Throughout the night, what tends to happen with the trend is we spend less and less time in deep sleep the longer that we sleep, and more time in REM sleep the longer that we sleep. So the first half of the evening, the first 3 or 4 hours or so, the majority of that time is spent in really deep, recuperating sleep. And the second half of the evening, getting into early morning, is when we spend most of our time in light sleep and REM sleep. Real quick slide on dream theory. Why is it that we have these vivid dreams? We kind of throw some respect to Freud. He was one of the first people to really attempt to study this scientifically. Freud wrote that dreams essentially are the golden road to the unconscious mind. So if you want to know what's happening in someone's unconscious mind, you need to analyze their dreams. And he said dreams have what are called manifest content and latent content. Manifest content being the actual plot of the dream. So when you wake up and you had that weird dream last night and you're telling your sibling about it, that's the manifest content. The latent content would be the underlining meaning of what that dream actually entails. And so if you have a dream about swimming in a very shallow pool, that's the manifest content. And then psychoanalytic may come in and say that, well, that shallow pool means that you are faced with some particular obstacle or whatever it might be. And that would be the latent content of the dream. Information processing theory, this has been backed by quite a bit of empirical evidence, and it's the idea that at least part of the reason why we dream is it allows us to consolidate the day's memories. And so while you are dreaming, you're actually kind of sifting through the events of the day, and some of those memories are going to find their way into long-term memories, and then others will be lost. It's one of the reasons why it's a good idea to study before you go to sleep. You should still be awake and alert while you're studying, but you're more likely to remember things if you study them before you go to sleep than if you study them early in the morning. And then activation synthesis, this is something that I think we've all experienced, and that is the idea that while you are dreaming, your brain has these random firings of different people, different ideas, different places, and your mind attempts to put those together into a story. And it's why when you dream, sometimes one place may turn into another place. Why one person you're talking to in a conversation all of a sudden magically becomes a different person. Those dreams that are really bizarre when we wake up and we think about them, in the moment when we're actually having the dream, they seem relatively normal. But as we think about them consciously when we're awake, we realize it's really just this string of unrelated people and places and events. That supports the idea of what's called the activation synthesis theory. And then our last slide today looks at the impact of drugs and consciousness. I will say the helpful hint there, time and time again, when the College Board is curious about your understanding of drugs and consciousness, they really are looking at kind of big general terms in regard to tolerance, dependence, and withdrawal. And so, again, think tolerance being the more you use some psychoactive drug, the more of that drug you'll need to get the same effect. And it doesn't have to be some kind of illegal drug, right? I've got my iced coffee right here. And the more that I consume caffeine, the more caffeine I need to consume to get the same kind of jittery feeling that I got that very first time I had a cup of coffee. Dependence would be the need of that particular drug. Dependence is the psychological term for addiction. And so when our brain adapts to a drug, we consider that a physical dependence. You might get headaches, for example, if you are addicted to caffeine and you don't have caffeine. The psychological dependence are the desires to be holding that hot cup of coffee in the morning, right? And so it's not necessarily this physical dependence that you have, but it's a psychological dependence to that behavior. And then withdrawal would be those negative experiences that we have when a drug that we are dependent on is taken away. And so if you are addicted to caffeine, those negative experiences that you might have if you have to go 3 or 4 days without having a Dr. Pepper or a coffee or whatever it may be, those are withdrawal symptoms. Lastly, I have listed there different types of psychoactive drugs. We have the categories of depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. Given this year, with the fact that we're focusing on the FRQ, I'd be surprised if you saw many questions about specifically psychoactive drugs. Be familiar with how these are different in regard to our physiological response. Relatively straightforward, right? Depressants are slowing the body down, stimulants are speeding the body up, and hallucinogens are causing us to have perceptions when there are no stimulations. would be shocked if I saw any of those on the FRQ this year. Certainly could. It's a possibility. If anything, though, tolerance, dependence, and withdrawal, that's where I would spend my time. Hope you found that helpful, and good luck.